Howdy everybody, David Minkin here, starting player with Connect More, and welcome to Avoid the Rules, a video of instruction and demonstration that helps ease rule understanding and learning. Easy start. Well, when I say easy start for this video, it's still not so easy, because today I'm featuring Arkwright. Now, Arkwright is a wonderfully deep, heavy economic simulation of the Industrial Revolution in London from 1760 to 1810 by Stefan Riesthaus, and it actually won the Game of the Year, the Heavy Cardboard Game of the Year. And this video I'm doing is courtesy of Capstone Games, who provided the game to me free of charge to do this video for you. And I'm not going to do a whole lot of preamble because there is a lot to get through, but I tell you, it is worth it. Please join me in this video where we can explore this game and hopefully get you started, because this is a daunting beast. It's a big game, it's a long game, it's a heavy game, and it comes with a bunch of different rule books in it. It comes with different player aids. It comes with a whole bunch of things. It's going to take you a while to wrap your head around. The goal of this video is hopefully take all of these things, put them together, and hopefully help them make sense for you. Now, there are different versions of this game. There's what's referred to as the spinning jenny, and there's also the water frame version. Water frame being the more complex and the more detail and more things. Well, the way I figure is, if you're going to take the time to watch a 2-hour video on how to play a board game and then go play the game for anywhere from 2 to 4 hours afterwards, let's talk about the real deal. Let's have some meat on these ribs and potatoes. Let's just talk about water frame. In fact, I played this game at all player counts, probably about 2 or 3 times each. I'm probably approaching double digits of player counts. I've never played spinning jenny. It's always been water frame, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. If you want to do spinning jenny, I've seen that Rado has done a little run through of spinning jenny. Go check him out. He always makes great videos. Go check that out for yourself. The other thing, I'm not going to be doing a final thoughts video either attached to here or separately, and the reason is very, very simple. When I make these videos, I do them unscripted. The backside, or the negative about doing something like that, they tend to be a little bit longer. But the good side about that is that my emotion flows through, and you'll know really through my tone how I really feel about certain things. And if I cannot do a video unscripted, then I don't do a video. I go back and I continue playing the game. So why do I tell you that? Because if I've taken the effort to play this game enough times, to talk about it in detail in an unscripted way, well, you can damn well bet that I love the game. I don't need to do final thoughts for you to figure that out. And you're either into playing heavy economic games like this, or you're open to the idea of doing it, or you're not. So there's no final thoughts required to push you over the fence. So if you're open to the idea of playing a heavy economic simulation, play this game. A lot of people love it. I love it, and it is a really great puzzly brain burner. But if you're not open to it, well, there's no sense me babbling on for another half an hour about all the things I like, or maybe things I like to tweak. Not any game is perfect, but not any spouse is perfect, and those imperfections are the things that you actually love about them. So the same is true for any game. But I'm babbling on enough. Let's get started. Let's learn how to play this game. And if you like this video, come find me on Facebook, Connect More Board Games, or Twitter, Instagram, Games YYC. Enjoy the video. Cheers. Welcome to the game, the myth, the legend, Arkwright. Now, Arkwright is a deep, heavy, economic game that's going to take a little bit of time to talk and explain about. So let's stop wasting our time and let's jump into the game itself. So here you see in the main part of your screen is the main Arkwright board. I have 3 player pieces set up here, blue, yellow, and red. And in addition, we've also got this little black token here, but this is a part of the game that's actually controlled by the game and is referred to as the importer. We'll talk about him later. And we've also got some other little bits and pieces off to the side here, but there are additional elements to this game that I'm not showing currently on the screen, just because it would just be too big to show you in one shot. And these elements include these development tiles here. Now, this is not consistent with the 3-player setup. In fact, this is every development tile that exists within the game, so that I can talk about the appropriate ones at the appropriate time. If you're looking for the actual setup, please refer to the instructions themselves. And in addition to that, each player is going to have their own little player area, and they're all going to look the same as the red player area that I'm showing to you right now. Now, there is a lot going on here, and so there is going to be a big footprint on your table. So get a good table, get a big table, and let's dive in. So what is the point of the game? Well, let's set the theme a little bit for you. You and your fellow players are opportunistic business magnates that exist in England during the Industrial Revolution, and you are going to build up the value of each of your individual companies by investing in 1 to 4 of the different goods that are available to invest in throughout the course of the game. Now, these goods are going to range from the basics and the essentials, which would be food and clothing or bread and clothing, to more of the luxury items such as cutlery and these glass kerosene lamps here. And so you're going to see in your own player area, the main board in your area is going to be where you're actually going to be building factories and producing goods of each of these 4 goods. So it's up to you to decide which of these goods it is that you want to invest in and hopefully profit from. So each of these rows here on your main player board here represents the actual factory of that particular type. So we got bread, clothing, cutlery, and lamps, and throughout the course of the game you will be building factories, which are going to be represented by these different tiles that are given to you at the beginning of the game. You're going to be building factories, you're going to be employing workers of England, and you're going to be producing each of these 4 goods should you decide to do so. Now, these goods can be sold then to the local English market, and the demand of the English market is going to be represented on this side of the board, which currently is covered up by available workers. These are people who want to work. So as we begin to hire workers, and each player does that, these workers are going to start populating this area of your player board here. You'll notice that we have 4 different shifts, they're called, for each factory in which we can actually assign workers to. You'll see that there's little worker symbols underneath each of these. As we begin to assign workers to these areas, we will be drawing them from this part of the board, and we'll be taking them off the way you'd read a book, from left to right, top to bottom. And in doing so, we are going to start revealing the demand of England for each of these 4 types of goods. So currently you see that the demand for bread is 2. This is a basic good. You don't need a lot of workers to have this demand. It is always there. The demand for cloth is 1, and these luxury items don't yet have a demand, but as we continue to take away and add workers to our own individual factories of each of the players, we are going to start revealing this demand. This is a way that we're going to be able to increase our share value by selling to the local market, and that in fact is one of the main names of the game here, is increasing share value, because the winner at the end of the game is going to be the player who has the company who has the highest net worth, and that's going to be determined simply by taking your share value multiplied by your number of shares. Now, each player is going to start with 15 shares, and shares are indicated by these little tokens here. You're going to start with 15 of those at the beginning of the game, and the nominal value of each of these shares is going to be £10. You'll note here that around the outside of the board, we have all of these little blue squares. These blue squares are going to be what tracks your share value, and each player is going to have a share value indicator disc that's going to start here on the £10. So throughout the course of the game, as you begin to increase your share value indicator, as a result, the number below, which is the number represented in pounds, that's going to be your share value. You'll be able to adjust your share value, hopefully, in the upward direction. Because again, you want a higher share value so that you might have a higher net worth of your company. Now, you'll also notice that as you progress along this blue track, that the correlation of how you move is not 1-to-1 with the actual value of your track. So, for example, between the values of 10 and 30 along the blue boxes here, you'll have to move 2 blue boxes to increase your share value by 1. Beyond 30, you're going to have to move 3 blue boxes to increase your share value by 1. And below 10, it is 1-to-1 correlated. As you move 1 box up or down, then your share value will move accordingly. Now, there's some other little finicky things here below the £10, which we'll talk about. Don't worry about that. But the thing is, you'll see here that as you begin to increase your share value, you're going to have to be building in efficiencies and building your empire as the game progresses, because it's going to get harder and harder to be able to actually increase your share value throughout the later parts of the game. So we're going to be focused on that throughout the course of the video, increasing our share value, but we also need to be concerned about, well, what about getting extra shares? Like I mentioned, we're going to start with 15 shares in our own player area, again, which is represented by these tokens here. But you might notice, the astute observer will see, that we still have these additional shares in each of the 3 player colors that I've set off here on the side of the board. That's because there's going to be an additional 15 shares available to each player to purchase throughout the course of the game. So that is in fact 30 available shares to you throughout the course of the game. But I have to warn you, it is not all just, popping champagne and fireworks. There is the chance that you may really suck at business and not do so well in the Industrial Revolution and have to continually to sell these shares off and not in fact grow your shares, but continually to sell them. And should you in fact lose all of your shares and still need money such that you may have to take out a loan, well, if you still have that loan at the end of the game, you are not at all eligible to win the game. You are not even considered for the game end victory conditions. And again, the game end victory condition is simply the person who has the highest net worth company. And what's interesting is if you look at the player's book here that's provided in the game, flip to the very back, they have this handy dandy chart to help you determine what the company's net worth is going to be. You simply look at the number of shares that you have, and again, the maximum here is going to be 30, and you see the current share value, so you multiply it by the current share value. But for those of you who are kind of hard to do, 25 multiplied by 21, for those of you who find it a little bit tricky, no problem, you can just cross correlate and you can actually then see what your actual share value of your company is going to be. Now I want to show this because this is a very important table, because of course it's going to help determine the winner at the end of the game, but it is also going to determine player turn order at the end of every round in the game. But we'll get to that. And I also want to show that because if that scares you away, well, save yourself the time and stop watching this video, because this is probably not the game for you, because this game does require a lot of planning around some mental math that can get a little bit tricky from time to time. So if you're not interested in that type of experience, well, then this is probably not going to be the game for you. So right, we need to increase share value. We're going to point out moments to do that, and we're going to try to avoid losing share value, and I'll show different opportunities throughout the game that will also do that. And we also need to keep reinvesting back into our company such that we can get more shares of the company from here back into our player area so that they may be used for the end of game calculation. And of course, as you begin to progress up this share value track, you're going to want to be purchasing shares at lower prices than what you're going to end the game at, such that you'll have a delta or an actual appreciation of your new shares. So how are we going to do all of this? Well, we're going to do it again by investing in these 4 different industries. So I think the easiest thing that we can do right now is just let's walk through the setup very quickly. Then I'm going to describe to you what a game round is going to be like. And again, each game round is going to be represented by a decade of the Industrial Revolution. So a game round is going to go through a series of cycles, and each industry is going to be the active industry once through each game round. So this will be cycle, the bread cycle, the clothing factory, the cutlery cycle, then the lamp cycle. Then each round is going to end with an actual event that will flip over, and then we wash, rinse, repeat, and we just keep repeating like you're reading a book. And so once I show you the first little bits of how the game works and the decisions you're going to have, the rest of it you'll be able to figure out no problem. Now this top decade here, 1760, this is in fact the setup decade or the prep decade, which we'll walk through, and it is slightly different than the rest of the actual round. So I'll go through that with you first. So let's get started. So first of all, whenever you see a little space here in this box up here, that means you have nothing to do. So we go through here, there's nothing to do, but you see in later rounds, in later decades, there's these numbers, 1s and 2s. We'll talk about that when the time is convenient. But we get through here, and now we get onto this symbol right here. It's a factory symbol with a little arrow showing us that we go in a clockwise direction. So this is just a normal direction. So what does this mean? Well, guess what? At the very beginning of the game, you get to start up some factories. This is, after all, how you're going to build your global conglomerates, or at least your English conglomerate of all these different types of businesses. So what Red has to decide, he goes, well, which one of these factories do I actually want to start producing something in, maybe start earning a profit? So he's like, you know what, I want to get involved on these bread factories here. So what he simply does is he takes one of his bread factories here, and what you're going to notice a couple different things on this little token here. On the upper right, you see the actual cost of the factory. So this one's going to cost us £8. Now we don't have to worry about that quite yet, but that is also going to be referred to as the base quality of this type of factory, because as you might imagine, is these factories, these little cheapo little factories here, they're basically like your Wonder Bread factory. They only have a certain level of quality that you can actually deal with. But you also see this little numerical 1 above here. This basically refers to the level that you are in the game, because there are 3 different levels within the game, and they are indicated here again on this little time chart right here. So here we see the little clock. We see the first 2 rounds, the prep round and the first regular game round, are going to be level 1. Then we have level 2 and we have level 3. This is very important because when you are building your factories, when you're within these first 2 decades, 1760 or 1770, you can only build level 1 factories, and then after that you can upgrade to level 2 and then subsequently to level 3 factories here near the end of the game. And so you'll see that each one of these factories in fact comes with 4 different tokens in them. There's a level 2 bread factory, a level 3 bread factory, and then finally a level 4 bread factory. And all of these have a different cost associated with them, which is also again the base quality. It's going to go up as the game progresses. But you go, hey, wait a second, level 4, where did that come from? Well, I'm glad you asked, because in fact in this game, one of these development tiles that you'll be able to get, they'll be able to modify things for you, and it's included in every single game, is this inventor tile. So this allows you to in fact build and even acquire tiles, which I'll talk about later, at the next level higher that you currently are at in the game. So say for example near the end of the game, when you're in the level 3 phase, you can actually use this different token to be able to build factories of a level 4, and that's how you'd see it. You're going to see a few things where that inventor is going to come in quite handy. But enough about that, let's get back to Red's turn here in this prep phase. So he's going to decide to build this level 1 bread factory here. Now the other thing that we need to point out, that when you do get a factory like this during the prep phase, and only during the prep phase, you also get some workers to fill up your first 2 shifts of this particular factory. Now, normally during the course of the game, should you build a brand new factory, you also get workers, but they will only fill up the first shift. It's only during the prep phase that you get to fill up both of these first 2 shifts. And again, there's going to be 4 shifts in the game. So where do the workers come from? Well, they come right from here. So what Red's going to do is he's going to remove the number of workers that he needs here. These are your available workers, the working force of England, and he's going to take them again just like you're reading a book, and he's going to put them here in these different worker slots here. Now this is important because these are the guys that are going to fire up the factory for you at the appropriate time, and each one of these factories is going to produce during the appropriate cycle of each of the decades. So for example, when we get to the actual game, then the bread's going to produce during the first cycle of the 1770 decade, then the cloths are going to produce, and then the cutlery is going to produce, and then the glass kerosene lamps are going to produce, and then we'll have an end of decade or end of round event that's going to occur. So then what he's also going to notice is that the amount that this particular factory is going to produce is indicated here both on the token. So the first shift is going to produce 2 breads, the second shift is going to produce 1 bread, and should he have any additional workers here in the third shift, they would also produce 1 bread. So the actual output of each of these factories is listed here in the bottom of the tile, and each of these numbers corresponds to the corresponding shift that you see here to the right of the particular factory. Now you'll also notice that within each of these shifts on the right hand side, it has a number on it. This number also tells you how much this particular shift will produce for each level of factory. So say for example we had a level 2 factory out here, so let me just find it here. You see that a level 2 factory will produce 2 goods in the second shift, and that's indicated right here as well in the level 2 factory token. And then finally, when you look at say for example the 4th shift, the level 2 factory actually will start producing something out of that 4th shift. Whereas if you have workers here with only a level 1 factory, they don't produce anything. So that's just a little bit of the anatomy of what these different factory tiles look like. But the important thing you need to know right now is that this is going to be referred to as the base quality of this factory, because now that we've actually established this factory, put it in place, we need to say, well, it's one thing to have a factory, but what the heck price are we going to sell this for? So what you have to do is you have to determine the price of the factory, and the price scale for each factory is indicated by these numbers below each of the different factory rows. Now, so the thing you also need to adhere to is that your price, your base price, can never be higher than your quality, because the very important equation you need to remember in this game is the quality of a factory minus the price that you're going to sell that particular product for must never be negative. It cannot be lower than 0. And you can also notice that there's some of these little blank token spaces here next to where we're going to put the different factory tokens here, and they are represented by these tokens right there. You might imagine that as we add these tokens into these spaces, whatever these numbers are, we can also augment our base factory quality as well. And you might imagine, because maybe you got some hotshot rookie that you paid for, and so he's going to improve quality because he's got the newfangled techniques of bread making that he brought from school. Or maybe you're going to have, this is referred to as distribution, maybe you got better ads out there so people are aware of your factory, so then there'll be more of an appeal. Because ultimately what you're trying to do is you are trying to adjust your appeal of any particular type of good, and the appeal is indicated right here along these 3 columns here in the center of the board. And I love the fact that this is right here in the center part of the board, because this is going to be the crux. This is the heart of this game, and how you manage this and how you're able to use it to your advantage to get done what you need done is going to be absolutely critical. But the neat thing is you cannot directly change your appeal marker for any one of these particular types of goods. It's going to be a result or a consequence of other actions that you're going to do throughout the course of the game. So here we're going to take a look at our base bread factory, and here Red decides, you know what, I am going to adjust my price to make it 7. So here he puts his little price token here on 7, and so the resulting appeal is going to be the quality minus the price, so that's going to be 8 minus 7, so that's going to be an appeal of 1. So then Red's going to take this token and he's going to put it on 1. Now this is huge, because this also dictates the amount of bread that you will be eligible to sell to the local market, because since you have a low appeal, it's only appealing basically to one person, so they're going to buy it from you. But say suppose Bread decided, you know what, I want to sell to multiple people. Maybe if I lower my price a little bit, so now it's 8 minus 6, my appeal will be 2, because now my bread is a little bit cheaper. There's a few more people interested in buying it, and that's kind of the way you think of it. Like, for example, I think a Ferrari would be a really high quality car. There's no doubt about it. It's just that $250,000 price tag makes it very unappealing to me. So that's how the price is going to affect the appeal that it is to me as a consumer, just to use a modern analog here. So Red's going to do that now. He has an appeal of 2. We're going to get back to the appeal indicator track here in a little bit, but that's basically how it works. Again, you never change this directly. It is a result of either changing your quality, your distribution, and or your price, or a combination of all those 3 things. So Red has done that. So then now, again, going in player turn order, and we'll do yellow and blue, is they will each choose a factory as well in exactly the same fashion. So off screen, I took care of yellow and blue, and here we see that yellow decided, you know what, I want to get into the bread business as well, but I'm going to price mine a wee bit cheaper. So he's pricing his at the base price of 5, so that he will have a higher appeal than Red. And then blue decided, you know what, it's a little bit too much competition. I'm going to go into the luxury goods. I'm going to go and work on these glass lamps here, and I'm going to get into that business. So as they built those factories, they adjusted the price just as I showed you before, plus they also took the appropriate amount of workers to fill the first 2 shifts of their appropriate factories. So you see, by taking these workers, more and more numbers are being revealed for each one of these goods. And again, these numbers that are being revealed represent the local demand for each one of these goods. So again, these luxury items only become higher in demand as more and more workers workers go off to work and there becomes more income into the economy and so on and so forth. It trickles down. The demand for these high luxury items will go up, whereas the demand for the essentials is always there, but it will continue to grow as more people continue to work. So now we move on to the next stage of the setup, and you see again we have exactly the same icon, but now the arrow is pointed in a reverse direction. So since we did red, yellow, blue, then we're going to go back blue, yellow, red in reverse order, and so then that way you can see there's a bit of a jockeying thing that goes on here, because you kind of want to find your own little niche. You kind of want to get in where there's maybe not a whole lot of competition right at first, so maybe you can kind of dominate that market right to begin with, so that you will have less competition and maybe get started and get moving forward a little bit quicker. So now blue has and yellow both have decisions to make. I'll make those off screen and get back in a second. So off screen I set up blue and yellow. So you see that blue decided to get into the clothes business, as did the yellow. The advantage yellow had for both of these industries was that he went after the person who selected before them and was able just to adjust his price such that his appeal was slightly higher than the next guy. So that comes back to red, and he gets to decide. He's like, wow, check it out, nobody is in cutlery yet. Maybe I will choose to do that, because that might give me an advantage, especially here in the first round or the first decade of the game. So then what red's going to decide is like, yes, I will do that. So I am going to take my cutlery factory and I'm going to build it. I'm going to put it like so. So again, the base quality of the factory is going to be 10, but that also represents the actual cost of the factory. So now he has to make a decision. Well, how much do I want to charge for my cutlery? What's the price going to be? He's like, well, I don't have much competition, so maybe I could charge something a wee bit higher and still be able to sell my goods and be able to improve my stock value. So he says, you know what, I'm going to set the price at 8. So again, we take our quality, which at this time has no modifiers to it, but so it's going to be 10 minus 8, so that's going to give me an appeal of 2. And again, I keep repeating this calculation for the appeal because it is so critically important to this game and understanding the flow of the game. Whoops, I guess that was red who did that. So there we have it. So now everyone has chosen 2 factories, adjusted the price on each of those factories, and as a result has a appeal for that particular good. So now we move on to the next stage here. Now there's 2 things that are involved in here. And the first thing you're going to see this little picture of these like columns that almost looks like the Abraham Memorial here, the Lincoln Memorial, or perhaps maybe the Parthenon. But this is going to refer to as basically a stock action. Whenever you see the brackets around it, it basically means the abbreviated stock action from what is actually described in the rule book. So what does this mean? Well, now you got to go, wait a second, I got to start paying for this. All this stuff just isn't for free, because now what you're going to have to decide is how many of your initial 15 shares do you want to sell so that you can actually start paying for this stuff. You're going to actually have to pay for these factories, and maybe you want to start leaving some money left over as well so you can pay for your employees, which I'll talk about. And whoops, I just realized that this guy didn't get his employees for the cutlery factory, so let's just add those guys in right now. So you're looking at your little board here, your different factory, you go, well, how much money do I need? And honestly, this is a really tough decision to make, especially if this is your first game. As a general rule of thumb, try to sell maybe 4 or 5 shares to get started, and then what you want to do from the next game moving forward will begin to reveal itself to you. So what we're going to do here with red is just not get bogged down in the details. He's going to say, you know what, I'm going to sell 4 of my shares. It goes 1, 2, 3, 4, and you see I'm missing one of the shares. There should be an extra share there. I'll fix that. But he's going to sell these 4 shares, and again, the value of these shares is going to be 40 pounds, 4 times 10. So he simply takes that money and adds it to his player area. Now you also notice that he also gets to do something else as well. He gets to do this little special action, which is shown here by this little white square here. Now this little white square you're going to see on multiple different tiles as well. If we look at the actual action markers that each player is given at the beginning of the game, which I'll describe later, you'll notice that 3 of them have this same little symbol underneath them as well. This symbol is very important to understand. What it means is that whenever you have that symbol, you can actually get one of these development tiles and add it to your playing area. You can never have more than one of the same development tile, but these are going to give you special privileges throughout the course of the game, but you are limited to a maximum of 4 of these development tiles in your special area. And these 4 tiles are in fact going to go up the top here. You see there's 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces that you can store them. So that's one thing you can do. You can also look here at this special little board here, and there are a couple different things here. Over to the right here of our boats, these are basically special or advanced action markers. Generally speaking, these action markers are the same as the action markers that are in your player area, but they're better, they're more efficient. With the exception of this particular action marker here, you do not start with this action marker, but all of these are essentially things that you can bring into your player area and use to do actions later on in the game, but they're just at a better rate, they're more efficient. But then to the left, we actually have these boats, because you're going to need boats should you choose that you want to take some of your goods, and instead of meeting the demand or the local demand of London and England, you're going to say, the heck with you guys, I'm going to ship my goods over to the East Indies and off to the colonies, and where they're going to pay me more money for these goods. Now for doing so, for shipping goods, you're in fact going to lose share value. Your share value indicator will go down 1 blue box due to the uncertainty of maritime travel during this time, but it can be extremely lucrative to gain cash or pounds that you can then reinvest back into your factories and to your workers and to your overall efficiency and productivity of these 4 different factories, or reinvest in new ones, or reinvest back in yourself by buying back shares and investing that way. So that's how money can be used as a very effective tool in this game. Continue to work on your engine and work on your reinvestment back into your own company. So this little white box can lead to intense analysis paralysis, especially at the beginning of a game. You're like, oh, I don't know, what should I get? And so then Red decides, you know what, I'm just going to work on my efficiencies. I'm going to take one of these special action markers right here. Now again, if you look at each row on this board, you'll see that we have these different levels again. Level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4, and the corresponding decades in which these tiles are going to be made available to you throughout the course of the game. So then in here, we're in decade 1760, which is the prep round or the start round, is that you can only grab tiles from here. And again, these tiles here, the way that they're set up is it's player number dependent, and there are some other little bits that you need to be concerned about. For example, there is a set of tiles which are going to be 1, 2, these 4 tiles here. For a 4-player game, you keep all sets in and you'll just shake them up and randomly distribute the light grays here in the top 2 rows. For a 3-player game, you remove one of these sets, shake up the rest, and then randomly distribute what's remaining here. And for a 2-player game, you remove 2 of those sets, and you do that the same for the dark gray as well, and then you just randomly distribute them this way. As well, for a 2-player game, you're only going to have these size 2 ships available to you, but for those little differences and edge cases, please go check the rule book. Red decides he's going to take this little guy here, and he gets to add it to his player area, and he will do so. So here, if we go look at the player area, you see he already has an action tile that looks exactly the same, but you'll see that the prices on the red action tile that he started with are higher than the prices with this new advanced action tile that he just got. Don't worry, I'll talk about what that means, but this is really quite powerful. Good start to the game. So that's what he decided to do. Now the one thing I need to point out, all this time I've been talking about red and showing what this means, but in fact this part of the setup should have been occurring in reverse player turn order as well. It should have been blue, yellow, red. You can imagine that we did it that way, and blue and yellow chose to get something different. So that little white box is intensely important for this game. So now we've done that, everyone has sold some shares, everyone has grabbed an extra little token here, and then we move on to the last phase of the actual startup. Here you see we got the 2 factory symbols again, and we got this ugly little pound symbol next to a big X. This means we gotta pay for our factories now. So that's why we needed to sell some shares, because the very next thing you need to do is actually pay for your factories. So if we go look at red, we see that red has a factory that's going to cost £8, and then his cutlery factory is going to cost 10. So he owes the bank £18. So he'll do that and he'll be left with £22. Okay, so we're finished the setup. We go to the actual event column here on, again, this little game flow chart that we have here, and you see there's an X. There's nothing to do here. We just finished the setup. So now what we do is we take the second little token, we roll it down 1, and we take this little guy and we move him over, and we continue to go through each of these boxes again like we're reading a book. So now we're starting a new round or a new decade, and we're going to advance through the different cycles. Now again, I remind you that the active good for each cycle is going to be indicated by the little token that we're going to go on top of. So it's always the same order from your essentials to your extravagant things. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to pop on here and you're going to flip over this little tile, and it's going to tell you a few little bookkeeping things you need to do. Remember that little black little icon I showed you at the very beginning of this video when I said he was referred to as the importer and he's controlled by the game? Well, this is when he's actually controlled. So this little top hat represents the importer, and it tells you that for this active good, which is going to be bred currently during this cycle, we need to move the importer up 1. So what does that mean? Who is the importer? Well, the importer, you see that he's going to move up the appeal track here. He represents the guy who's bringing things in from abroad. So for example, here we've got the bread. This is the guy that's bringing in the pain au chocolats and the baguettes and all the other fancy breads and pastries from France. Or maybe he's bringing lefse, the Swedish flatbread. He's bringing and meeting the demand of England that is for the exotic. It's for the things that are abroad. And so he's going to be able to import these things into England. The heck with all these things that are produced locally, and he's going to be able to meet that demand or be able to provide a product to the people who want it. So that's what he represents, and he's actually going to compete against you for when it's time to actually start selling your goods to the local market. So that's extremely important. Now the next thing you'll notice on here, there's also going to be a little number with a little worker next to it. These are the number of workers that have rejoined the workforce. So what we're going to do here is we just simply take these workers from below here. This area of the board is referred to as the fired worker space. And in fact, if you look at the little worker right here, his head's kind of hanging on his shoulder. It looks like he's not having such a good day because he was fired. But then he is now gainfully ready to be re-employed. And so he goes here. We see that number is 3 on that token, and we add them back. And when you add workers back into the available worker space, you add them in reverse order from as if you were reading a book. So it'd be from bottom to top, right to left. And the other thing I should mention while I'm going through this video is this game comes with a pretty awesome sequence of play little sheet that I recommend that you follow through the very first time that you play, because there's a lot of little niggly bits that you may miss throughout the course of playing the game the first time, or you might not pick up on right away. This is an excellent resource, especially to use as you get more familiar with the game. What's the next thing that we do? Well, now you can actually take actions. Now's your time to actually start doing stuff. We haven't really done anything yet, so let's do that. And where you're going to do stuff is down here in the bottom left. You'll notice that there's going to be 4 columns, and each column corresponds to a player color. Yellow, red, blue, and green. And for this game, green is actually not playing, so this column will not be used. Now, beside each of these columns is going to be a cost. This is referred to as the administration chart, and these are the administration costs. And the costs are going to range from £2 up to £10. What you're going to do is this is your opportunity to take any of these action markers that you might have in your player area, and you get to play them onto one of these action spaces over here, and you get to do the actual subsequent action of this marker. Now, the thing I need to stress is that you must place a marker on your player color, and you must pay the associated cost where you put that marker, regardless if you have the money or not. Now, this is where things can get you into a little bit of trouble, because if you don't have the money, you're going to have to do an emergency sale of shares, and that sucks, because when you do an emergency sale of shares, you're going to be forced to lower your share value indicator by a prescribed amount, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. So you do not want to get yourself in that position. So if we go to Red's turn, what he's going to do is he's actually going to simply choose one of his tiles and place them somewhere here and take the subsequent action. And then in player turn order, everybody will then place one of their tiles on their corresponding player color and take an action as well. Now, the thing I need to stress is, say for example, Red decided to take this action. action. I'll talk about each of these actions individually in a second, but suppose he decides to take that and put it here. That little marker that he's used now, that action he's used, is no longer available for the rest of the decade. It will stay there. You do not take any of these markers off until you get to the very end of the decade and you kind of during the cleanup of the particular round. However, he can reuse this, but you'll have to pay an additional cost of £2. So let's get started about talking about these actions, what they mean, and how this whole little chart works. First, I want to talk about these action markers that you have that actually have numbers on them. So you'll see if you look at these action markers that red has, some of these action markers don't have any numbers on them whatsoever. So for example, this action marker, there's no numbers. These two, there's no numbers. These three have numbers. Now, these other ones, it doesn't matter where you put them on the administration chart, what space you put them in, because you'll get to have the full privilege of what these allow you to do regardless. However, these ones here that have these numbers on them, you must be able to pay in administration cost an equivalent for what these numbers are so that you can take the corresponding benefit. So here you see this is actually the machines. This allows you to build machines into your factories, and what's cool about this is the cost of actually running machines is way cheaper than the cost of running people. Now you cannot add machines uniquely into a space. They must be replacing a worker when you do so. So you can add one machine for £3, 2 machines for £6, or 3 machines for £13. So how does this work? Well, what you have to do is, suppose I wanted to add 2 machines, I would have to put him down here where I would pay £6 for the use of this particular tile. If I placed this particular tile here and only paid £4, then that £6 option is no longer available to me. I have not paid enough to actually activate that. So these really introduce an interesting element and planning for how am I going to place this out so that in subsequent cycles in this decade I'll still be able to put my action markers where I want and not overpay or underpay for something that I really want to do. When you see these little tokens here with the number on them, this number is only available to you. The benefit of being able to get 2 machines, you have to pay £6, is only available if you pay at least £6 here in the administration chart. You could put it on this space and pay £8. You're not going to get any change for it. You might be forced to do that later. You're not going to get any change for it, but you will as a minimum be able then to take this £6, pay the £6 price and be able to do 2 machines. So what does that exactly mean? So suppose I go here and I paid my £6. Well, then what I'd be able to do then is, if I look at my factories, you'll notice that where my workers are, some of these workers actually can be replaced by machines. They maybe have some mundane job of maybe just counting or maybe twist tying the top of the bags that can be automated by a machine, who knows what. But this guy here, he could be replaced by a machine, he can be replaced by a machine. You cannot add machines where there's not a worker. So then what you could simply do, suppose we did those 2, we could take these 2 workers here, they have now been fired, so they go over here into the fired worker space, and now we pick up some machines which are represented here by these little tokens here. So now these machines will simply go here back into our factory and right there. So boom, now what we've done is we've added 2 machines to our area. Now this is something that Red could have done, but you'll notice at the beginning of the game he actually took the advanced action marker for machines, which allows him to add up to 3 machines for only £10, because you'll notice that this particular one that's given to you at the beginning of the game has you only can add the 3rd machine for £13. But then you must say, hey, well wait a second, that doesn't quite make sense because this chart only goes up to £10. So then if I have £13, well then how would I ever pay for that? Because again, you must at least pay what that price is in administration charge in order to get that full benefit. Well, this here is where the other development tiles come in. So there's going to be a development tile here that is going to allow you to add £3 to any one of your prices. So if we look here at the workshop, it goes, when you're doing the machine, your administrative costs, you can add an extra £3 to it. So what this means is if you had this tile, right here, you could place it on the 10-pound administration cost symbol, and then with this workshop you'd be able to add 3, which gets you up to your 13, and then you would pay the full 13, and you would then be able to add 3 machines instead of being limited to the 2. So this basic machine tile is only good to get your 3 machines if you have that workshop development tile on there again. Now again, these are these synergies in the game that are hard to kind of grasp and understand at the very beginning. So you'd go there, you'd still have to pay your 10 plus the 3 for the workshop, because you always have to pay that cost. And then you pay your 13 pounds and you get 3. But you know what? Screw it. Yellow said, no, I bought this because I don't want to mess around with that workshop tile. I just want this benefit right from the beginning. So in fact, instead of using his base tile, he's going to use this one, plop it there, and instead he's going to pay 10 pounds, and he'll have the opportunity then to do 3 machines. So here he's already done 2. Let's replace one of these guys down here. He takes this guy, he adds it to the fired workers, takes a machine, and he adds it right there. Boom, that's the machine tile, and that's how you can also get an upgrade or one of these advanced tokens, because any of these tokens that you see here off to the side here again, whether it be ships or these advanced action markers, can also be placed here as an action during your turn during any one of these cycles during each decade. So it's extremely important to keep an eye on which ones you need and perhaps which ones you can get before your opponent might get them, because sometimes they're in extremely high demand. So this is what red has done. You'll also notice that this allows him to pick up another little token. He can get, again, either a token from here or another token from the development tiles up through here. So he looks up through here and he says, what am I going to do here? So there's a lot of different choices of things he can do. Now, one thing I want to point out is that this accountant is another really powerful way that you can actually modify your administration costs throughout the course of the game. So if we take a quick look at this, we'll see that the accountant allows you to modify the cost that you're going to pay in administration up to 2 pounds, either in a plus or negative fashion. So what's cool about this is throughout the course of this round, as these different action markers start blocking different spaces, if you have an accountant, then you could, for example, this guy here, he's going to normally cost you 2 pounds, but an accountant would allow you to take 2 pounds off that cost, because he doesn't really care about how much he's got to spend anyhow. He doesn't have the same restrictions as, say, the machine tile has, so then he could actually use that for free. So that is actually really quite important and really quite powerful throughout the course of the game. Other tokens that will affect what you're going to pay in terms of administration costs is we also have here the administrator. Now, you'll see there's a little thing, despite bureaucracy, space 2 pounds. What does that mean? Well, the administrator is going to help you be able to use this 2 pound space regardless of an event that's going to occur. So now that's a good time to talk about it. During setup, there's going to be these event tiles that are going to be randomly placed. However, one of the first 3 events must be the bureaucracy event. And what that is going to do is it's going to basically turn off the 2 pound space of the administration. So once this is pulled for the entire next round or the next decade, then this 2 pound space is not available for anybody to actually put any of their action markers. And this is indicated by the white 2 here, and also the slightly darker background of each of these colors. So that is really quite brutal sometimes, because you might really need, to take a cheaper action and not pay such a high value on it just to be able to get by that round, but there's no getting by it. This event is in every game, and it's going to be one of the very first 3 events that's actually going to occur. So in order to avoid that, you can get that administration, and regardless of the bureaucracy, because you have a good administration working for you, that will still be available to you. So that's what that means. But some of these development tiles have 2 different benefits associated with them, and it's this other one says no additional fee when space is used more than once. So what does that mean? Well, like I said, all of these action markers, when you start placing them, they will not be moved or replaced until the very end of the decade. But suppose you really want to do this machine action again on a subsequent cycle. So again, you can only take one action per cycle, and each cycle is represented here by each of these goods. So you'll take 4 actions throughout the course of a decade, but you really want to do that again. Well, you can, but it's going to cost you an additional £2 to whatever the administration cost is here indicated on the side of the table. So if I wanted to do this again, and say I wanted to trigger it for the £10 to get another 3 machines, well then I would have to pay 10 plus £2 if I wanted to do it in a subsequent cycle. So that's what that means. And the final tile that we have, and I do not believe this tile is in the original Spielworks version of the game, is this Wealth of Nations. And here you see it's got a little pen and £0. So whoever takes this, it is pretty cool too, because you can place it right down here where the little pen is here. That's yours. And now you essentially have a 0 spot available to you, and you can put your action marker on there, and you don't have to pay anything. And what's also cool about this is that nasty old bureaucracy little event that I was talking about that closes off the £2, it doesn't affect this. This one is still exists throughout there. So there's going to be a variety of development tiles that you can pick up that you can start modifying the actual administration cost you're going to pay for any of these tokens that you're going to put down for the action that you're going to take. In addition, there's also going to be development tiles that can augment the actual different actions that you can take. So here, for example, I'm showing you an advanced action marker of the machine action that you can take. So it's actually going to make the original slightly more powerful or more efficient. But in addition to that, you can also get development tiles that are going to improve the efficiency of any of these actions. So here, for example, we look at this development tile here called School. So you can see at, and there's a little machine symbol right there. It tells you your workers are relocated. So you notice before when I took the machine action, I took the workers off of my board when I put the machines on, and I just sent them unceremoniously with their box of packing over here to the fired workers symbol. But what I could have done had I had that development tile of School, then what I could have done instead was I could have taken the worker, say for example, that was displaced here, I could have just simply moved him to another factory. And so in this way, I don't have to rehire them. I can just move them around. So that could be extremely powerful in keeping and building your workforce, because essentially what you're doing is saying, you know what, you're no longer needed here to put twist ties on my loaves of bread on the packages, but I'm going to send you off to school. I'm going to retrain you in the art of cutlery, and we're going to use you down in that factory. So that is pretty cool. And it also has this ability where when you produce, you can actually shut down the last line of your production. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit when we actually start talking about production. But there's going to be a variety of tiles here throughout the course of the game that is going to make all of these different actions that people can take more effective. And also associated with the actual machine action, you see each little, it shows you a little symbol there. Well, that symbol refers to this here, the machine cube that I showed you earlier. So for each machine bought by another player, you gain £1. Woohoo! So this here is another development tile you can get, especially if you see another player is really good getting into buying machines. You can get that tile, and should you have it when people actually start taking this machine action down here, then for each machine you get an additional £1. And again, money is not going to win you the game. It is simply a tool that you're going to use to reinvest in your industry, in your company, and in yourself, so that you can have the highest net worth at the end of the game. So it's going to be quite important to do that. So that is going to be the machine action. So what are the other actions that we have? Well, I'm also going to focus here on these other actions that have numbers on them, because the numbers on here and the numbers on what you actually pay on the administration chart matter. So first of all, let's take a look at this little guy here with the thumbs up, because you see here he's got a £6 /12 In much the same way, here's the machine tile. The number of times you can take this action is indicated by where you're at here in the actual slashes. So if you want to take the action once, you must pay an administration cost of at least £6. If you want to take the action twice, you must pay an administration cost of at least £12. So again, right now you must realize, well, wait a second, 12 is higher than the 10 that's available here, but no problem. We all remember here the accountant, which allows me me to pay up to £2 more or less of administration costs. So again, if you're going to be focused on this guy here, the base action icon here, you're going to need the accountant to get the full benefit of this particular tile. So what does this actually mean? So suppose we actually take this icon or this action marker and we put it here. So we'll take this away so we don't get confused. And so he's going to pay £6 and he gets to take this action once. Now again, I'll remind you that if we look at the advanced action markers, we have the exact same marker here, but you can actually improve your quality, is what this is called, up to 3 times by paying 5, 8, or 12 pounds. And as the game progresses here into these darker grays, you can actually improve it 3 times by only paying up to 10 pounds, or 6 pounds if you want twice, or 3 pounds for once. But you see that at this stage in the game, we're still here at level 1, and we're in the decade 1770, which is indicated over here. We don't have any of these advanced action markers available to us, so nobody will be able to take them. But suppose Red decides to go here and he says, I'm going to pay £6, so he pays those £6 and he gets the ability to actually use this marker once. So what does this mean? Well, if we look in our player area here, we'll notice that we have all of these little thumbs up symbols here. It's almost like the Facebook symbol here, and it's got +1, +2, +3, +4 on it. So what this is going to do is, if you can take the action marker once, you can place it next to any one of your factories, and this is going to augment your quality of the factory. You'll recall that the base quality of the factory is the cost of the factory, is indicated here in the top right. But we can augment our quality by buying this quality marker here and assigning it to any one of our factories. So by putting it here, now I've made my base quality 8 and I've augmented it +1, so now my quality is 9, and so you see my cost here is 6. So you recall that the appeal of my bread is now going to be 9 minus 6, it will be 3. Woohoo! So now you see I'm up here competing with yellow simply by adding this quality to my bread. Now this might be, essentially you maybe got that new latest machine that makes things just a little bit sweeter or better. You got a new source of sugar. Who knows what it is, but this is a permanent thing. Once you add it here, it never goes down, it never goes away. And you'll notice that generally speaking, you can improve for any one factory up to the 4 quality. So in this particular case, now your quality would be 12, and then your appeal 12 minus 6 would be 6. But since we've only taken this action once, we can only do it that one time. Now suppose I took the action twice. Suppose I went through here and I had this particular accountant pay up to £2 more or less, and I paid my £12. I could take this action twice. Now what's cool about that is I can actually add it to this factory. I could just do a +2. That's an option available to me. Or I can add another one down to here. So I can basically here on my cutlery factory, I'll add him on there. In the same way, now my base quality is going to be 10 plus this augmented quality. So now it's 11 is my quality minus 8. That's going to give me an appeal of 3. So now I'll change my appeal marker right over there. So that's pretty cool. You'll be able to adjust your quality, and as a result, you'll adjust your appeal to the market. Now, like I mentioned, that you can only go up to +4 in quality for any one factory. As you can imagine, there's a development tile that actually changes this. So say for example you had the engineer, so at the little thumbs up symbol here is levels 5 and 6 are allowed. So by having the engineer, then what you're able to do is then you're able to flip over this little icon if you get there, and again you have to pay for them normally, and then you'll be able to continue to augment the quality of any particular factory. So that will allow you to really adjust your appeal just by improving the overall quality. The other thing the engineer allows you to do is your administration costs are freely determined. So before, when I was showing you all these different things that you can do to actually affect your administration costs, by having an engineer, you can basically put these tokens anywhere you want and pay whatever you want. It just doesn't matter. So you can pay the exact cost that you want to if you have the engineer, because they are a calculating bunch. They're not going to worry about all these different spaces. They will make it work. So that is how you're going to adjust your quality. And again, you're going to have these advanced action markers that you might be able to pick up, but again, they were randomly distributed at the beginning of the game. In this game, they are not yet available. But you'll also notice at the bottom of this, we have this little symbol here. Now, we haven't talked about this secondary action marker. You see it's got a little pound symbol here with a little arrow up or down. This means that you can adjust the price now of any factory that was affected by your main action. So say, for example, we did do the 2 here and we decided to go right here. So we paid our 12 bucks, we had the accountant to do so, and we were able to add 1 here and 1 here. So by doing that, we automatically adjusted our appeal. That's the first thing you do. But now you might say, you know what? I don't like that too much. I'm going to adjust a price, because now that my factory is a little bit different and I can actually see what the competition is doing, it might be interesting to me to actually adjust a price. And that is what that little symbol means here. It allows you to adjust a price, again, of any factory that was affected by the main action. So what you can do is then, in fact, you can say, you know what, I'm going to adjust this price up 1. So now I've got 9, 8 plus 1 minus 7 is 2. I'm going to go back to where I am. I'm not too fussed. I want to charge a higher price for it. And then I'm going to adjust this price. So we got 11 minus 8, that's a 3. But I know I'm going to keep bumping it up. I'm getting a little bit greedy. So now we can go 11 minus 9 is 2, because this is also the factory in which I don't have any competition. And as a result, my appeal is going to go down. Now, it is possible for you to overpay administration costs such that you can adjust prices of other factories that were not involved in the main event here, the main action. So say, for example, I took this and I paid £8 for that. So I pay £8, and that's going to give me the privilege of doing this once. So suppose I did this here once, like so. I have £2 left over. I could use one of those additional pounds to actually adjust a price of something that was not affected by that action. So this is simply your quality action. So that takes us to our third action marker that actually has a number on it, and that's what's referred to as your distribution. And this is here your bullhorn here. Now, your distribution is also going to be very much like your quality, but it's going to be short-lived. It's a temporary boost in your overall quality of your factory. So here, if we take this distribution, you see that it says max 4. You can, again, overpay, but you would put him here in your 4 space. So what does that mean? What are we going to do with that? So again, if we go back and we look at our bread factory, for example, we see here that we got our quality that we adjusted earlier. I'm going to leave it for the purposes of this video, but you also got this little guy here, and he's also got these same numbers around him, 1, 2, 3, and 4. You're going to have to pay the full cost in pounds of each of these numbers. So say I go here and I put my action marker here at 4. So that's going to give me £4 to use. So by placing this guy here, that's going to cost me £1. I could turn it to a +2. That's going to cost me an additional £2. So in total now I've spent £3. So I do not have enough money to get the next level, because that would be costing £6, but I'm limited again by my token here, maximum of 4. So then what I could do is I could say, well, I can do that, and I could maybe add another little distribution like so. So that's going to cost me 1. So I've done 1 plus 2 is 3. Plus 1 is 4. And in doing so, now all of these numbers line up just nicely along the top here, and have changed my quality and distribution of this factory. So now we add all that up together. 8 plus 1 is 9, plus 2 is 11, minus 7, which is my price. That now gives me an appeal of 4. So now my appeal goes skyrocketing up through here. And similarly here on our cutlery factory, we are going to have 10 plus 1 plus 1 is 12, minus 9. That is going to be an appeal of 3. So we adjust it accordingly. You'll also notice that our secondary action here is, again, we can adjust the price of any of our goods from the factory in which this main action affected. You can overpay with this particular guy, and you can use those pounds to actually adjust price on factories that were not affected by the main distribution action. So again, what that might mean is, suppose I took this particular action, and suppose I did my +1 plus 2, so that cost me 3. And suppose this was already here in place, so I cannot afford to actually add another distribution. But what I could do is, with that additional pound, because I paid £4, that additional pound I could spend on the cutlery, and I could still adjust the price after I took the main action. That's what that means, and there is that ability to adjust prices on things that were not affected by the current action, but it's going to cost you £1 in administration costs to do so. So as you might imagine, like all the other tokens I've showed you, there's better tokens like this out there. So if we look here at the advanced actions table again, you'll see that here in the first two phases of the game here with the phase 1, phase 2 with the light gray backgrounds, there's an identical tile, but now you see that it has a maximum of 7. And then finally near the end of the game, we have in the final eras, we have maximum 10. So these will allow you to take that same action, but again, much more powerful as before. Now, as you might imagine, there's also a development tile that's going to help you out with this. And so we look here at this development tile. So here we see the little bullhorn, so we know that's distribution. This is your patent. So your administration costs are free plus £2. So what's cool about that is now you can start paying up. It's going to work in much the same way as the workshop did for administration costs free plus £3. Now this free plus £3 or £2 for me is, first couple times I read, is kind of confusing, but basically what it means is whatever you pay, you can pay £2 more. Here, for example, you can then have a little bit of flexibility where you're going to put this icon, because if you have the patent, then you can basically put it here and pay your additional £2 and be able to squeeze them into your column of actions, maybe perhaps if it was taken by something before. But what's also super cool about the patent, you see your second option of things you can do is you can immediately do +2 levels. And that is really powerful, especially when you have these distribution markers that are starting to get high in value. Because here, for example, the next distribution bump that I want to give this thing was going to cost me £3, and the next one after that is going to cost me £4. So in total it's going to be £7. Ugh, that is really, really pricey. But if you have the patent, you can just bump 2 right away regardless of cost, and that would be extremely helpful for getting your distribution up. But one thing about these tiles that I really haven't talked about is wherever you see these little red stars next to any of these possibilities for actions that you see here, or for the entire tile itself, this means as soon as you use that particular token, you have to return it back to the display and make it available for everybody else. So even though that's super powerful, you're only going to get a chance to do that the one time. Now, the other thing about these distribution is, unlike this quality marker here, this thumbs up, this distribution is a fleeting thing. It is not permanent like these numbers are here. After this factory has produced, it is going to click down one, and then the next time it produces, it's going to click down again. And so in this way, as it clicks down, is also going to automatically affect your peel by -1, because your price will stay the same because you haven't adjusted the price when it does this as a part of the game. And so then it's going to kind of click away on you and eventually disappear if you get back down to 0. So this is the one thing about this. This distribution is kind of like a Facebook ad. You're kind of hot for a week, and then it'll just continue to click down, and it's going to click down at the end of the cycle for the factory in which it is associated with. So throughout the course of the game, for each decade, if you have a distribution tile on any particular factory, it'll click down once per decade. Now, there is one other action tile that does exist, that does have a number on it, and it does matter where you put it on the administration table and what you actually pay. That are these ships that you see as well. Now, these ships are only available to you, again, if you take one of these little box icon actions here to actually pick up one of these ships. And these ships, again, are only available at different eras, as you see, 1, 2, 3, and if you have the inventor, perhaps the 4th. Now, these numbers on the ship, say for example, we take a look at this guy, they represent the carrying or the cargo capacity of each ship. So in order to use a ship on one of these action spaces, you need to place it at least so that you pay the equivalent of the cargo space. Now remember, where you actually place the ship, so suppose red actually has the ship, where you actually place it, it can be modified by these different other tiles in here. For example, if you've got the accountant, you can pay up to £2 more or less administration costs. So where you actually place the tile doesn't matter so much as the actual final amount that you pay in administration costs. That's what you're actually going to compare up against this actual cargo capacity. And that's true for the other tiles as well that have these numbers on them. So say for example, I put this guy here on the 2 slot, but I use this accountant to pay £2 less or 0. Well, then by not paying any administration costs, well then I have not actually done anything with this actual token, because I've not paid at least the same as this cargo amount here. Now this cargo amount just dictates how many goods that you can actually carry on this particular ship. So as you can see, this will actually escalate throughout the course of the game, because you have boats that range anywhere from 2 goods all the way up to 10 goods. So what's kind of cool about this is there are 2 ways in which you can ship goods in this game, and having one of these tiles and actually placing them on one of these administration action spots is one of the ways to do it. So say for example I put this guy right here, that allows me to ship up to 4 goods. Well, what does that mean? Well, I'm going to show you another action in a second that will allow you to actually take some contracts for each of these 4 different goods that exist in the game. When you get one of these contracts, you can put them on one of these little contract spaces, and the space that it's on, there's a little number above it that represents how many goods of that particular type that you're going to have to ship so that you can actually honor this contract. And as the game progresses, and I'll show you how this is done, these contracts are actually going to slide from left to right so that they're getting harder and harder for you to fulfill. But say for example I had a bread contract here and a clothing contract right here, so I need to send at least 2 cloths and linens and 2 breads abroad so that I can actually fulfill that contract. Because any unfulfilled contracts at the end of the game, you are going to move your share value indicator back by the value indicated up here in these top little prize little amounts here. That represents the amount that you owe. So you definitely want to fulfill your contracts, and once you get them started, the time's a ticking. You've made promises to people and they want you to deliver. Now what's cool about using the shipping action and actually putting your ship out here on one of your action spots for your action in the round is that you can actually ship different types of goods as well. You're not limited to one type of good. You are limited to the actual capacity or cargo capacity of this particular ship. But in this particular example, we see I can ship up to 4 goods, and they can be actually 2 different types. So in that particular case, you see I've got these contracts for both cloth and bread. I could resolve both of these, provided that I had these goods for somewhere in my warehouse here, which I'll talk about. Provided I have those goods, then I can actually exchange those goods back, put these contracts back off here. I've honored them, and then I would have used the ship action and shipped these 4 things. Now for using the ship action, there is some uncertainty involved with maritime travel. For every ship that you use, you will move your share value indicator back 1. So say this is Red's turn here, so suppose Red was up here. For shipping, he will also lose his 1 value on the share value indicator on these blue boxes here, but that's per ship. And again, in this particular case, you can only actually use 1 ship because you have to put it on one of these blocks here. But remember, the key thing here to remember, whether it be ships or whether it be any of these other action tiles that have these numbers on them, this is where the amount that you pay in administration costs matters. But where you put the tile on the administration icon here does not matter so much, because there are modifiers that may change how much you're going to pay. And again, I keep going back to the accountant. So here, for example, the accountant pay up to £2 more or less administration costs. So although I may put this guy here, the quality icon, remember, I could put him on the 4, but if I had the accountant, I'll pay 6, I will still get the benefit of that 6 right there. So that accountant provides you that flexibility. But just by putting this guy, say, on the 6 and then using the accountant to only pay 4, I do not get that particular benefit. You always compare it back to the actual amount that you paid in administration costs after all the little modifiers have been settled. So those are the action tiles that have numbers on them and that you really care about, again, what you pay for administration costs. What about these other action tiles that don't have any numbers on them? Here we see we got this guy here with a little employee icon in here. Here you'll recognize this icon as being the stock option that we did this during the setup, but in the setup it had the parentheses around it again, if you'll recall, which meant it was a modified or a reduced stock option. Here is the full meal deal, so we'll talk about that. And then we got this little guy here. Again, you'll recognize that this particular icon is also the same as these icons during the setup for actually building some factories. These these action icons, when you use them, they don't care about the actual administration costs that you pay. You still have to pay an administration cost, but then this is where your planning is really involved, because you don't want to be overpaying for these things. You want to be using the higher administration costs to actually be benefiting you for these tiles that care about the actual administration costs that you spend. So why don't we talk about these one by one and just talk about what they actually mean. So for the first one here, we actually have this little factory marker right here again. And I'm going to talk a little bit more in detail about this, because at the beginning of the game during the setup, we saw that we had this. We simply chose a factory and we built it. Well, this here, when you actually go through and you take this action, so again, now you can put this action anywhere you want. The actual cost that you spend on it doesn't matter. You're just trying to squeeze it into a spot that's going to work. When you do this, you can, like in setup, you can actually purchase a factory. So when you purchase a factory in this way, again, it would have to be a new factory that you don't have. So suppose Red decides, you know what, I'm going to get into the cloth business. He would just simply take the topmost level that he doesn't have, he put it here, and he would pay £9 for that. And again, this is going to be the base quality of that particular factory. So once he buys that factory, then what he's going to do is he's going to determine what price he's going to put on this factory. So he might say, for example, do 7, and then that's going to change his quality here to 2, because again, we take the quality minus the price and we change the appeal. Pardon me, I called that quality before. This is going to be the appeal. So his appeal in this particular case would be 2. But there's a lot of other things that he can actually do with this factory marker. He can also do what's referred to as modernize a factory. Now, to modernize a factory, all that means is you're going to add the next level up. You cannot skip levels. So say, for example, it was later in the game, we were down here, we're in era 3, and you still only had a level 1 bread. You cannot skip level 2. You must pay for level 2 and then for level 3. And so simply to modernize a factory, what you would do, suppose we go back to where we were, you would have to pay the full cost of the new factory, and I just simply put them back on top there. So now we actually have a level 2 factory. But again, during this part of the game, that's not allowed, because we're in this first era. We cannot get these level 2 factories until we're in the second era, unless of course you have the inventor. And I want to talk a little bit more about the inventor icon here as well, because what is unique about this inventor icon is it says you can purchase the next level allowed 4 times at additional cost. But here's the rub. When you get this, when you just take this into your possession, you must pay £5 immediately. You haven't even used it yet. You're going to pay £5 at the beginning. And so then you might say, in this particular example, you say, well, my inventor, he's going to be up here because he used, say, a tile that I had. So I'm actually going to use that tile and I'm going to modernize this factory to a level 2, even though we're still only at level 1 in the game. Cool. But now I've used up my inventor. I've used this first guy here. I've bought something beyond the level of the game that we're currently at. So I have to make a decision. If I want to hold on to this inventor tile, I then have to pay £10 to hold on to it so that I can use it in a similar fashion in a future turn, or maybe even on the same turn. Then if I was going to modernize this guy, and I could do that in the same turn, then I could go, well, I'm going to modernize him as well. I'm going to pay £11 for that as well. And then I have to make a decision. Do I want to pay £15 to hold on to the inventor tile? So this guy here, you always have to prepay for the use of him. And he's not only beneficial here for when you're building and modernizing factories, but he's also very useful again for when you're looking at these additional advanced action markers in your ships. Again, keeping in mind your restrictions again for where you're at in the game. So if it were level 1, you could use that to buy one of these higher capacity boats or one of these little juicier little advanced action icons that you might be interested in. So then moving on and carrying on with this factory here, the other thing you can do with this particular icon here is you can close down a factory, because honestly, you're going to find that sometimes when you're playing this game that it is just too much. You maybe have a factory that's not doing so well, and you might say, you know, screw it, I am out. So say, for example, Red wanted to close his cutlery factory. Well, then what he could do is he just basically take everything off, put your price back down to 0, your appeal goes back down to 0, and you are out of the cutlery. You could maybe perhaps come back into it and continue to rebuild in a future turn, but for now you are out. You are not allowed to build a factory and shut it down during the same turn. Now, I don't know why you'd want to do that, but I just state that you cannot do that as well. So the other point that I want to talk about with modernizing your factories, it is extremely important that you do this throughout the course of the game, because I want to talk about this column right now in this little flow chart of how to play the game. You'll see that beginning when I was showing you this earlier, this was a blank space. There was nothing to do here when we were moving this little gray disc, moving it across. There's absolutely nothing to do. But as we move our way down into the second half of the second era, suppose we were down here and we were just getting started here, you see that there's a red number 1. And you go, well, what does that mean? That means at the very beginning of this round, everybody has to consult their own factory area. So suppose, let's just put this back to where it was. And once you consult your area, you see like, oh no, I'm at a level 1. This is what it means. You have to look at the level of factories that you have. And this means now that these factories are starting to lag behind. They're not keeping up with the Industrial Revolution. They're yesterday's technology. They're old. And so this is actually going to penalize you, and it's going to cost you extra workers at the end of that round when you actually resolve that particular factory, or the end of that cycle for that factory in that decade. So what does that mean? Well, at the very beginning of the round, when you put your marker right here, you are going to take 2 workers here from the fired worker space, and you are going to put them beside that factory. You're going to put them right here. And what that essentially means is that in order for you to run this old and outdated factory, is it's going to require 2 additional workers to kind of keep things going. These are basically extra maintenance men running around taking care of things. These are guys that are going to be required, and there's going to be a way that once you modernize, so should you take this factory action tile here again and take an action to actually modernize and get this factory back into good working order, so again you would pay the £10 there to modernize to the new level, only then do these 2 workers actually disappear. So if those 2 workers are still there when it's time to actually fire up this factory and to pay your workers, well then you're also going to have to pay these guys in addition. So it's really going to chew into your bottom line, and that's going to suck. So that's what that means, is when you start getting through here, you're going to need to start modernizing all of your factories. So even by the time you get to the last decade here in 1810, all your level 1 factories and level 2 factories are going to be considered obsolete. So you have to have everything up to a level 3 factory. So you really need to be taking that into consideration. So if we just take, for example, the bread, you see, for example, to build the bread at beginning, it's going to take £8. Then to modernize, it's going to take an additional 10. Then to modernize to level 3, it's going to take an additional 12. So it is quite expensive. And this is the cheapest factory, because if you get down to the lamps, it's going to be 11 just to build, 14 to modernize, 17 to modernize again. So that's a total of 25, 42 pounds just to be able to keep your lamps up to date by the end of the game and not have to pay these additional costs of these extra workers. So you really want to keep that into consideration. Now, if we go back to this actual factory action, when you do build a factory, so here in this particular case, I built a clothes factory, what you will do is you will take enough workers to fill up the first shift of this particular factory. And again, you would take those here from the working area here, and you only fill up the first shift of workers. So unlike the setup where you got to fill up the first 2 shifts, here when you actually build a factory and build a new factory, not modernize, but when you build a new factory, then using this particular action icon, you only fill up the first shift right here. So then, of course, after you've done all of these things, you built, you modernized, and as you can imagine, once you modernize as well, so say for example we go up to the bread here, there's going to be an immediate impact for your appeal. So say for example we modernized bread to level 2, we had the inventor, we used it, so now we see we've got 10 base quality, plus 1, which is your quality adjustment, which is 11, plus 1, which is your distribution, so that's 12, minus 7, we haven't adjusted the price yet, now our appeal is 5, so you're going to change that on this appeal indicator. So then once you've done all of these, you always want to make sure that you automatically adjust your appeal as you add in or modernize new factories. Then what you can do is then you can actually do a price adjustment. Again, this will be for any factory that that was involved on the main factory action. So if, for example, we never did touch the cutlery, say for example, then you're not allowed to actually change the actual price on it. You can only change the price. Say we modernized bread and we added our clothes factory, then you'd only be allowed to then readjust the price for both of these particular factories. But we'll say that we're happy with that, and that is the factory action icon. Now, as you might imagine, there's also this development tile that will help you out when you're actually starting to build factories, or when you're taking the actual factory icon here. It's called the developer, and what this means is for every new factory that you build or modernize, or for every factory type, pardon me, you get to take £5 off per cost of that factory. That is huge, and you're able to use this up to a maximum of 4 times with one use of the actual factory icon here, or factory tile here, because you can actually use this ability once per factory type. And you'll recall that there's actually 4 factory types: bread, cutlery, clothes, and the kerosene or the glass lamps. But you also notice that he's got this little red star next to him here, so that you can only use that once, and then you'd have to return it back to the main supply and perhaps get it in a future little white square action. So let's move forward here then to this little dude over here. This is basically your hire employees, because as you can see, you can get employees automatically when you build a factory, whether it be through the factory icon when you get to add employees to the first shift, or at the beginning of the game when you get to add employees to the second shift. But here we need to get employees for a variety of other things as well, because here I keep talking about this warehouse. This is going to be a place where we can store excess goods that have not been gobbled up by the local demand of England, but you can't just store it for free. There needs to be little guys here working and looking after your stuff at your storehouse. So when you take this action icon here, and again, it doesn't matter the actual cost that you're going to do, you can just place it anywhere. So I always try to do it the cheaper the better. Then what you can do is you can simply go to the market and just take as many guys as you need and fill up as many spots as you want. So say here, for example, I might start filling up this guy, and this isn't going to cost you anything right away. It's only going to cost you after these factories have fired up in the appropriate cycle in the decade that you're in. So we'll put it back to where we are right over here. And so in this way, you can also start filling up your warehouse. And the cool thing about the warehouse, so say for example, we take a guy, we plunk him right here. This guy is going to allow you to keep bread. These little red cubes here represent any good that they're on. So they're basically a generic token which represent any good. So as you get excess bread, you can just basically store them down here through this column, as many as you need, and you'd be able to store these bread for future endeavors that you might be involved on. If, however, you decide to put this guy here, well, then he can store basically 3 of any particular good, because he will take care of this particular row. So you might maybe accumulate a few little things as you go along. That would be perfectly fine. You could, if you wanted, hire another guy and actually do this. Say you're producing lots of bread, then that would allow you to store 2 of that particular good on each of these spots here. If, however, you still had, for example, let's just do this. So this is perfectly fine, and then you had an extra bread left over, then you could only store 1 because we don't have an additional guy here. So you can see there's 4 different columns that you can put workers on that take care of each of these individual goods, and there's these 2 groups of rows, one group with 3 and one group of 2, in which you can put your warehouse workers. Now these guys, like these other workers, must be paid at some point in the game. They'll in fact be paid at the end of each round. Now you might go, what about your ships? We noticed that there were some of these ships that actually had little worker icons on it, similar to the action icon that I'm showing you. We see these little guys right up here. Well, when you actually acquire a ship, again through one of these little white square box actions, and you decide to get a ship, then you will automatically hire the number of workers indicated on the ship icon. So say for example you took this ship, you see there's 1 worker right there. You would take that worker, and say for example you'd also take the ship, you add the ship to your little shipping area. You can only ever have a maximum of 2 ships at one time, and then you take this worker and you just place them here. And so all these workers here on this board over here in your large warehouse and here on your ships, these are all guys that are going to be paid for at the end of the round, and there's a little reminder to you to pay these guys at the end of the round marker. Here you see, before you actually see what the event is going to be, you see that there's a little box box here that represents a large warehouse, and little dude, pay your dudes. And then you got your boat, and little dude, pay your shipment. And that's a little reminder for you to do that. But here, I'll put these guys back here. We'll pretend that we didn't get them. But this is your opportunity to start getting employees. It is also your opportunity, should you take this action icon, suppose you already had these guys here in your warehouse, then you could actually freely move these guys in your warehouse to anywhere you want. Say, for example, you put them here, you go, you know what, I don't think it's really going to work out that way. I'm not really sure about that. Maybe I'm getting more clothes. I don't know what it is. You can freely move these guys, but that's only when you can do it. You cannot take workers from your warehouse and put them into your factory and vice versa. So you can continue to hire as many guys as you possibly want. You don't have to pay anything for them quite yet. So the astute observer here might then say, well, wait a second, I see something here. If it's the last round of the game, say we're right here, we're all the way down, we're working our way through the different cycles, we've gone through bread, we've gone through clothes, we're here in cutlery, and you see again that the demand of any one of these goods is represented by these numbers below the actual available workforce, which is represented by these pawns. Then you might say, well, wait a second, what if I took this action in the last round, and then I could just throw a whole bunch of workers maybe on a factory that I don't even own or not even filled up. I could just fill up all these spots here, and in doing so, I'll be taking off more and more workers off these spots and increasing the local demand of England for these goods that are about to be produced. And in doing so, I might be able to up my actual income generated, or I might be able to really benefit from that increased demand. So you might say, whoa, that would be super powerful. Well, I'm going to tell you right now, that is one way to completely screw yourself at the end of the game if you're doing it just for game end purposes, because the designers of the game have anticipated those of you who might want to game the system like that. And you can do that. You can hire workers for factories that will never be produced again because you've already gone past them. The game, well, let's just look at it like this. The game has already surpassed these, and so they'll never produce again unless there's some special actions. So it is possible to do that. So suppose we did do that. Suppose we take some extra workers here and we say, you know what, I want to drive up the demand in, you know, in my kerosene lamps, they're coming up, or my cutlery, because I got some cutlery. I need that extra couple demand, so I'm just going to do that. Now, if you do that, what you must do, and again, this is only for the final round, you must take one of these workers and you basically just put them over here as a little bit of a reminder to you that you've done that. You have actually added some workers here, and they don't look like they're going to produce, because there is a possibility for you to produce them through an additional advanced action tile. Now, all of these advanced action tiles that I've been talking about throughout the course of the game have generally been basically like souped up versions of the action tiles that you start the game with the exception of these little guys right here. Now, this guy here, they're basically both the same thing, but with a slight little difference. They allow you to produce a factory out of turn, provided that it's actually not the factory of the current cycle that you're in. And this allows you to produce goods out of your first 2 shifts of that factory. Recall there's 4 shifts in the factory, and this one here coming later in the game allows you to produce up to 4 of those shifts in that factory. So we're going to talk about production here in a little bit as we get through the action icons, but you could then play one of those production tiles, produce this factory that you've added workers to, because you're actually going to do something with them. And if you do that, then you'd be able to put this guy back and then produce. And when you produce, and say you decide to produce the first 4 levels or what have you, whatever you produce then must be stored in a warehouse, because you can't really do anything with it. And so that would be an action that you'd be able to take with one of these little guys here. So this would be, again, a tile that you could pick up in one of those little white square icon actions, and you put them over in your player area, and then you would be able to then pay later and produce a factory out of cycle. Now I bring that to your attention because we're talking about this employee action. Suppose we did do that and we did add these extra bogus employees here on a factory that is already produced, and we're in the last decade of the game, and we do not come and take one of these produce out of turn special tiles to actually fire this thing up and actually get some of these goods produced after the final round in the game. Then what's going to happen if you're stuck with one of these guys that indicates that's what you did, then at the very end of the game, before we calculate the winner, what you're going to do is your share value indicator goes down 4 spaces, 1, 2, 3, 4. So depending on where you are, that guarantees that your value is going to go down by at least 1 pound. That's one thing, but even more importantly and even more drastically is you have to lose 2 full shares. So you'd actually have to take this 5, cash it in for 3 out of your own area. That is huge in terms of value. Suppose you're over here, you would lose, there's 44 pounds of value that have just disintegrated, with addition to actually be like 46 pounds of just gone out of your net worth because you were gaming the system. And so I talk about that now with this, because this is how this demand, by people taking this particular action, is how you're going to drive up the demand of all of these goods. It is also how, as more and more workers join the workforce, it's also how the cost of each of these workers is going to increase. And we'll talk about the cost of these workers when we talk about actually paying them after the production round. Now, the next thing you can actually do, and I'll put this guy right back here, is you can also fire workers here as well, because it is possible that you might actually start getting too many workers. So here, for example, we just look here at the cloth factory again. And again, this is not a run through. I'm just showing things for demonstrative purposes here as well, so don't be trying to follow this along as a run through. I'm just showing things as an example. In this particular case, suppose we had the cloth factory right here, and you see that the 4th shift is not producing anything for a level 1 factory. So we might decide, you know what, I don't want to pay for these 2 punters over here. They're not really doing anything. So during that action, I could also take these 2 guys and I could fire them, and I could just throw them down here into the fired working space. Now again, any workers that you take to actually for hiring purposes, you take here from this little area here from left to right, top to bottom. Should all of these workers be gone, then you could also then take workers from the fired workspace and add them when you are hiring workers, should that instance occur. So that takes us to the last action icon, and this one is incredibly important. Well, they're all incredibly important, but this is basically the stock action icon right here. And again, you'll recognize this icon here from the setup that we have here. And this stock action icon, it allows you to do a lot of interesting things. First of all, remember the main point of this game is to be buying back your shares, to be increasing your share value, to improve the overall net worth of your company. Well, this is what allows you to do it. So if you want to take this action, what you can do is you can buy back as many shares as you want. So say, for example, Red is over here. He could buy back as many shares if he has cash available for at 19 pounds a piece. This will be the price that he's going to pay, and in doing so, then he would just take these shares here from the area where we've set them aside, and he'll add them to his own playing area. So what the goal here then, of course, is if you take this action throughout the course of the game, then what you'd be able to do is hopefully buy a few shares here, and then maybe bump your share price up by a few more shares, and keep working your way up so that your adjusted cost base of all your shares throughout the course of the game is going to be less than the total share value of where you're going to be at the end of the game, so that that delta represents basically your earnings per share. And if you have lots of shares that you've got, then boom, you're doing good. That's the whole point. You're reinvesting back into yourself. Now, it also allows you to sell shares because maybe you didn't quite plan things quite right. You're not getting the cash flow that you need, so then you'd be able to actually sell shares. And again, you would take the shares now from your actual playing area here, and you sell as many as you need just so that you could get some cash. So again, you would sell them for the price right down here. Now, there's a bit of a rub here. I need to go focus on this area here from 1 to 10, because once you start dropping down into this area here, the price at which you're going to sell shares is still going to be the same. It's the 7 pounds that you see here, or 8 pounds, whatever the number is in that beige box. But if you're going to buy back shares and your share value is so low, the bank doesn't have any confidence in you. You still have to buy them back at 10 pounds. So once you're down in here, the price that you're going to buy them back at is always, the minimum is always going to be 10 in this game. However, you may sell them for even lower, and you do not want to be in that situation. Or if you are, at least not for very long. You're kind of going backward. And what makes those two options, especially selling the shares, so incredibly important is you need to take this action so that if you are running low on cash and you're not capable of doing what it is that you want to do, that you can take this action and still get some cash, still take some money out of your company so that you don't get in trouble. Because the worst thing that can happen to you is that you run completely out of money. So say, for example, you run out of money here, this money is gone. Well, when you take an action, you must still pay for it. You're not allowed to pass. So you have to go and, as a minimum, pay the administration cost to take an action. You don't necessarily have to take the action, but you have to pay the cost. So you always have to have cash on hand. Where cash is also handy is when you pay for your workers at the end of each cycle for that particular factory, or again at the end of the round for your large warehouse and your boats. So if you don't have money on hand because you weren't planning accordingly, and maybe you didn't take this particular action, there's one of two things that could occur. The first thing that may occur is you might have an emergency sale of shares. So here Red's pretty lucky. He still has some shares left over, and suppose he needed to take this particular action here at 10 pounds. So his shares are worth 13 pounds. So he would be forced to sell one of his shares because he can only sell as many shares to cover the cost of what he needs to do. So he would sell this share for 13 pounds and he put it over here. He basically then pay his 10 pounds and get 3 pounds back, but you will lose value in your actual share. And the way that you do that is you look at the first number of the share value. So in this particular case, it's a 1, and you drop your share value indicator by that number for each share that you were forced to sell. So in this particular case, we were only forced to sell 1 share, so then we move back 1. If, for example, we were way up here and we were forced to sell 1 share, well, then you'd move back 2, because the first number in the value here is 22. It's 2, so we go 1, 2. So you really don't want to be doing that. But the worst case scenario, even beyond that, suppose Red does not have any shares at all. Now that he still has to pay. So in this particular case, he doesn't have any shares, he must pay, and he'd likely be over here somewhere, is then he has to take out a loan. And to take out a loan, each one loan is going to be 10 pounds. So he'll get 10 pounds and he'll have to take out as many loans as required so to be able to pay for whatever it is that he's missing funds for. So in this particular case, he'd have to take out 1 loan. So when he takes out a loan, he would simply take one of his share value, his little share tokens right here, you put it on the 10 to remind you that you've taken out a loan, and you put as many of these as loans that you've taken out. And then on a subsequent turn, when he actually does take this action again, he may repay that loan for 13 pounds. And so again, you can only repay the loan by taking this action, and so then he can clear that off of his slate. And again, you'll recall that any guy who has loans left outstanding at the end of the game is not eligible to win. So this particular action does a lot of interesting things and necessary things, and the timing of when you're going to do this action is incredibly important. It also helps you sometimes just kind of get out of a jam. Let's go back here and look at our warehouse here, and in this particular warehouse, suppose we had some goods right here, and suppose we had a few things like this, and Red needs to sell some of these things. So when you take that stock market action, you can also do a sale of goods from your warehouse, and the price is pretty crappy. It's not very good. The price you're going to get for any one good from your warehouse from a stock market action is indicated here. So for each bread, it'd be £2. For each cloth, it's going to be 3. Cutlery is going to be 4. And for a glass lamp, it's going to be £5. So again, not a great exchange rate of all the other opportunities you have to generate money from your goods that you produce, but still sometimes a necessary thing that you might be able to do. Take these out and you get the particular price indicated here. So that's an additional thing you can actually do on the stock action here. And finally, we talk about the planning required with this thing. Is you also require to take this action to be able to start getting contracts to be able to ship goods. So again, I showed some of these contracts before. Is you'll notice that we have a contract here. These 4 little icons here are a contract for each of these particular goods. If you want to be able to ship any one of these goods off to the East Indies in a future turn or a future opportunity throughout the game, there must be a contract in place for you to do so. You just can't throw stuff on a boat and ship it overseas and expect people to be excited about what you've sent them. You got to put the contract in place first. So then with that stock market action or stock exchange action, you can put as many of these contracts on as you feel that you'll be able to fulfill. Now you can also, suppose you already had some contracts on there from a previous turn, you could also adjust their position on this track provided you're adjusting it in a positive direction. You cannot move things back down, but you can say you see that you're really starting to get a lot extra clothes produced. Well, then maybe you go, well, instead of 4, maybe I'll bump that up to 6. I'm feeling a little bit bullish about this, because when it comes time to actually ship your goods, you must have the exact amount of your contract, and the amount required are these numbers here above these little contracts, 2, 4, 6, 8, and 10. You must have that exact amount to be able to ship them, unless, of course, as you might imagine, if you have a development tile that might change that. So here we have agent in the colonies. So you see he's got this little kind of contract sign here. Here you can actually, when you fulfill a contract, you can actually do plus or minus 1 of the number of goods as to where your contract is actually sitting. So there is a way you can kind of adjust it and have a little bit of flexibility, but there is no flexibility on your planning. You must pick up one of these contracts, and again, that's done through the stock exchange action. So those are all of the action markers, and I hope I showed you as well all of the different kind of consequences with these action markers. But let's go back to where we were here, and let's suppose everyone has taken an action, and we're still here in the first decade, and we're in the first cycle here, the bread. Let's suppose everyone has taken an action, they placed out their stuff. So say, for example, each guy has one of these different actions on here. Now it gets time to actually produce from your factory, and you only produce from the actual active factory of that particular cycle. So here only bread will produce, and so all of the people who have bread are eligible to produce during this particular time. One frustration I had when I first played this game is I wanted to be included on all the production rounds of every factory right away, and it completely messed me up, because in order to build up a good factory, because you can only take one little action at a time, it's really difficult to be able to fire up a factory and be competitive with it just right away. So I find that if you want to get into all 4 factories, take your time. It's okay to not produce a factory and sit this phase out while the rest of the people do it. But this is the important part of the entire phase, because it's also where your stock value may increase based on what you produce and what you're able to sell to the local market. Now, when you jump into the production phase, one good thing to do, just as a matter of course, is always double check to make sure your appeal is at the right spot, because honestly, with all these different little actions that you can take, it's easy sometimes to forget about it sometime throughout the course of a round. So again, we'll double check. Here we've upgraded to 2, we modernized our factory. We have 10 base quality plus 1 plus 1, so that's 12 minus 7. Our appeal should be 5, and in fact we do see that red's appeal is 5, so that's a good double check to do whenever you go into the production phase. So then now what you can do is, I always do it the same way regardless of how many things people are producing, because this is part of the game that's sometimes hard for people to kind of wrap their head around. So let's just do this. What we will do is we take all of these little different good markers here and we place place them here on the bread row for each of these little squares that represents one demand or local demand for that particular good. So we'll do it like so. And so here's all the local demand for the good. Now, red is going to be able to sell up to 5 of the bread because his appeal is 5, whereas yellow can only sell to a maximum of 3 because their appeal is only 3. And again, the importer here is only going to be eligible for meeting one of these demands for his pain au chocolat that he just recently imported. So the way that you resolve this is you basically just go down and say, we start at the highest appeal, which is red, and you say, okay, this is red, he produces 1. And so what I typically do is you can either stack them here, or as you get them, you can actually stack them here on your factory on each of their different levels that you produce. So here, for example, we got a level 2 factory that he'll produce 2 here and he'll produce 2 here. So even though he's eligible for being able to sell 6, or pardon me, 5, because his appeal is 5, he'll only actually be able to sell 4 because he's only making 4. However, he does have one here in his warehouse, so he can voluntarily choose to sell this as well to actually meet that, because he can sell one additional one. But any of these goods here in your warehouse, you do not have to sell at this particular time. It's totally voluntary. So what he's going to do is so we can put them there as you go along, or you can put them beside. It's totally up to you and your group's choice as how you want to bookkeep. It can be maybe a little bit finicky depending on how things go, but I just go like this. So for illustrative purposes, we go here. Then you go to the next level and you say, okay, red produces. Okay, there's another one. Then we go to here. So now, and you always go from the highest appeal down to where your finger is as you march you down. So red produces again, yellow produces. So we'll put yellow over here. Then we go here. Red produces again, yellow produces. Then we go here. Red produces, yellow produces, and the importer will have one here. Now you'll notice again that red is beyond its production capacity. We already showed that it was 4, and here I showed 5. So in this particular case, what you can do is then red would just simply take from his factory. He would just take this guy off and say, okay, I'm taking that one out of my factory. So in fact, I'm going to sell these 5. So there's a little bit of leftover. The amount that we supplied is actually less than the demand. No problem. You just put that back, and then this is what you're left with. And just to double check yellow, here's yellow's board. We see that yellow is fine because yellow had first 2 shifts of a level 1 bread factory, and so he's capable of producing 2 + 1, 3 goods, and that's exactly how many he was able to sell. So that was really good planning for yellow. So now what you do is you're able to actually sell these for the price indicated on the value that you've set your price to for that particular factory. So here, red would be able to sell for $7 a piece. So he's going to sell 5 times 7 is 35 pounds. Woohoo! This is also a good opportunity to show you about some of these extra development tiles that may exist that may be beneficial to you during this time. For each one of these goods, whether it be bread, cloth, cutlery, or these lamps, there are what's called a patron. Now a patron is somebody who is loyal to you. He will buy from you no matter what. And so if you had, for example, this patron tile in your area, he allows you to actually sell beyond what your appeal level is. So say, for example, you had this patron in here and your appeal was only 3, so you could only sell 3 to the actual local market. You could actually sell a 4th guy here to this patron as well, because he just doesn't care. He acts in addition to that. So having a patron sometimes allows you a little bit of extra revenue stream as well, especially when things start getting competitive out here on this appeal indicator. But the other cool thing that the patron allows you to do is anything sold to the patron is going to count for when we actually start doing stock price or stock value indicator shift and movement, which I'm going to explain right now. So once we have gotten paid for the particular items that we've sold, then what we're going to do is we're going to check to see how our share value indicator is going to move, because it can move up to 4 spaces in the positive direction during this time. And this is the primary way in which you're going to get your share value indicator moving upwards or in a positive direction. So the first thing you're going to check to see, did everybody sell at least 1 good? Yellow says, yep, I've sold at least 1 good. Red says I've sold at least 1 good. So both of their share value indicators goes up 1. Then you say, well, did you sell 2 goods. And red says, yep, I've sold 2 goods, so he gets an extra 1. Yellow says, yep, I've sold 2 goods. He gets to move up an extra 1. So in this way, they've been able to move up 2. Then we say, well, who sold the most goods? And here we see that red sold the most goods. He actually sold 5. And you always take into consideration the importer for this as well. And so red says, nope, I've sold 5. So he gets to move an additional 1 forward. Now, if you sold something to the patron, even if it was beyond what your appeal was, you actually count that for all of these calculations, as I mentioned before. So then the fourth and final thing you check is who had the best appeal. Here, red had the best appeal. He gets to move forward 1 more. So in that way, red was able to move 4 spaces along his share value indicator, and yellow 2 and blue none, because he's not at all involved in this particular factory yet in the game. It is possible that suppose you had a tie, and I'm just making this up, suppose it was something like this, and we had a tie in the number of goods that was actually sold. 4 to yellow and 4 to red, for example. It doesn't quite make sense, but if there was a tie, there is this one development tile here, this charisma tile. Now again, the charisma is always included in the game. It goes bonus point even when tied. And that means right now, during this moment, when you're deciding these bonus points or any of those 4 categories, whether it be highest level appeal, who sold the most, if you're tied with somebody, you still get that bonus point. So that can be incredibly powerful as well when you're going through this, because trying to improve your share value, and if you're able to use that tile to be able to continue to raise your share value even when tied, is incredibly powerful. And once all of that is done, we take these goods off. Now you got to pay your workers. You remember all these workers that were taken before for free and just having a fun time with them? Well, now you've got to pay them. So we look at our factory and we got to pay our workers. So here we see we have 2 workers here, and in this particular case, although I didn't really talk about it, if this was an obsolete factory, in this case it really isn't, if it was an obsolete factory, you would still have these 2 workers that were right here, and again that was resolved during this column here when you march your way here through this game progression chart over here. If you had these workers must also be paid as well at the same rate as the additional workers. So here we have red's got 2 workers. So what does that mean? Well, those workers must be paid the salary indicated here on this part of the chart. So here we see that the bottommost empty spot is indicated here in this 3 row. Both of those workers have to be paid £3. Now, if, for example, we had all of these workers were gone, I'm showing this for demonstrative purposes, the amount you pay them is still £3 because there's no empty spot. There has to be an empty spot of a worker in this row to be able to pay the next amount. So as soon as this guy's gone, now the workers are going to be £4 each. But in this particular case, they're 3, and then any machines that you have are £1 each. So in this particular factory, again, assuming it was obsolete, you'd have 1, 2, 3, 4 times 3 is £12 plus 1, 2 is £14. Now, there are ways that you can augment how much you're going to pay these guys, again by these special development tiles. So here we see we got a foreman. Now a foreman goes at one factory, the wage is minus £2 for a maximum of 4 workers. So that's pretty powerful. In this particular case, you can have 4 workers only costing £1 each. Now when you get this foreman, you have to assign him to a particular factory. And the easiest way to do that, suppose red had got him and he assigned him here. The easiest way to do it is, you see you got 4 factories, 1, 2, 3, 4. You got 4 slots, 1, 2, 3, 4. So then you just put this token in the same slot that matches the factory you want him to work at. So here you want him to work at the particular bread factory, put him here. So that way you know to take this benefit when you fire up the bread factory. So now he'd actually cost 1, 2, 3, 4, which would be 3 minus 2 is £1 each, so it's £4 plus the 2 machines, that's £6 at all. So here it's very important that this is actually assigned, and there's different ways you can assign them. I find this is to be the easiest way to a particular factory. Now this takes us to another cool element in the game behind this whole little white square, because here I've been talking about how this white square allows you to basically be picking up these additional tiles, whether they be development tiles up here, or whether or not they be ships or these advanced action icons, but they also allow you to take any of these development tiles that are associated with a particular factory and move them. So it's really cool because in this particular cycle you could have him here and then perhaps use that little square icon as an additional action later and then move him here and then use them again on your cutlery in a subsequent turn. And so that's a really powerful use of that little white square that sometimes isn't completely obvious or is easily missed, especially in your first few games. I know I forgot about it quite a bit. So once you've paid all your wages for that particular factory, now you have the opportunity to ship that good. So this is really quite neat because before I showed you shipping, perhaps you would take it as an actual action, and in that way you're able to ship multiple types of goods depending on the capacity of the ship and the number the value of each contract of the good. But in this case, what you can do is, suppose you actually had one of these little boats here and you had this little bread contract here, you could now ship your contract here. This is a chance for you to do it without having to burn an actual action of placing your tile down here. It's kind of like for free. So what you can do then is you can say, suppose I overproduced, and again I'm just using this as an example. I overproduced, and suppose I did not have a warehouse. I didn't have any place to store it. This is kind of a neat opportunity now for you to still be able to do something and not let your goods rot. Because suppose I overproduced, I had two things overproduced, and I don't have any place to put them. Well, before I have to make that decision, I could choose to ship them. And here I got a size 2 ship, I got my 2 breads, and then voila, I can actually take care of this contract. And the cool thing about this is when you take care of that contract, these two go away, is the value you get for shipping any goods is in fact the value of the base quality of the particular factory that produced them. So here I would ship 2 goods and I get paid £10 each per good, which would be £20. And normally I find, especially in the earlier parts of the game, the first 2/3 or so, the value you get of goods for shipping them is going to exceed the value or the price you would actually set for them, because this price again is always being determined based on what you see going on out here in the appeal indicator and what other people are doing and what this darn importer is doing by whatever these tiles are showing as you flip through the game. So that's a really great way that you can actually start generating higher levels of income, especially at the beginning parts of the game. And this is a way for you to be able to ship a particular good after it has produced. And if you do it right, you don't have to necessarily store it because you have the opportunity to ship it. The order matters. So I really suggest that when you first play this game, you follow the procedure precisely, because then it matters that you can ship it before it goes away. Now again, recall that when shipping, your share value indicator will go down once per ship that sets sail. So the other cool thing about the shipping action at this particular time is you can use multiple ships. So say for example I had these 2 ships, and again since that was a 4 I would have hired a little worker along the way because there's a little icon there. Is now suppose this bread was here instead, so now I need to fulfill 6 bread to meet the contract. Well, here I got 4 plus 2. I could use 2 boats and actually fulfill this contract and I'd have 6. But since I used 2 boats, now my share value indicator goes down twice. So it was here, so it would go 1, 2. So that's the disadvantage of doing that, because you can use your both boats during this time. And again, if you did the actual action during your action phase, you could only use 1 boat because you could only fit 1 boat on one of these squares. So you could do that. But suppose you chose not to ship, you didn't have everything lined up, you don't have the excess supply that you need, whatever, then what's going to happen is if you have a particular contract of that active type, is going to advance 1. So in this way, as the game progresses, at the end of each production phase of that particular good, this will continue to advance, and it's going to make the deliverable of this stuff even harder, because the way I visualize this is essentially these guys are like, hey, where are my 2 loaves of bread? And then they call you up again, we're really getting annoyed, you better make this up to us. And then they call again like, what the heck, now everybody really wants this bread. And on the way it goes, and it gets harder and harder to actually fulfill these. If you are already here at this highest value and you cannot, it gets time to actually bump up the contract, you cannot do it, then your share value indicator goes down 2 every time that it's supposed to advance. So that is going to really hurt you, because say it's here, go 1, 2. And recall, not only is that going to hurt you throughout the course of the game during this time of the game, if at the end of the game this is still here, your share value indicator goes down by 10. Goes down by the value of any contract left unfulfilled that's above there. So you do not want these contracts to get away from you, because they can escalate and really cause problems, and problems such that they'll really cost you the game, because your value of your company will just be driven down by these unfulfilled contracts, because you're basically ticking off the colonies and getting them annoyed with you, and nobody's very impressed. So after all of that, then anything that's left over, any of the produced good that's left over, it hasn't been sold domestically, it hasn't been shipped away, then you have the opportunity to actually store it. And again, I've talked about the warehouse before, so you could actually just store some goods and kind of build them up for later. Now this is the large warehouse that you actually need employees working at to be able to store things. There is an opportunity for you to grab a development tile referred to as the small warehouse, and the small warehouse in fact allows you to actually store up to 5 goods on your actual player board. So here, if you have a small warehouse, you can store 5 goods stored free of charge. And what that means is, as you collect some of these things and you have the small warehouse, so say for example Red's got the small warehouse here, then he could, suppose he did not have a worker here in his large warehouse, you can actually start storing goods here on the back side of your price indicator track, and this is another opportunity you have to have stored, but you can only store up to 5 different types of goods. This is also quite a neat way to be able to store a few little excess things if you're not really sure about your planning, without having to worry about paying for additional workers in this large workhouse. So that's what one cycle looks like. Now I've talked about everything, because now what you're going to do is you're just going to march onwards. You're going to go to the next cycle. You're going to flip them over. You're going to say, okay, the importer here needs to move 1. I need to take 3 workers from the fired worker space and add them back into the job market here. And in doing so, I'm taking away a little bit of demand for some of these things. And you're just going to wash, rinse, repeat, and do exactly everything as you walk your way through these different cycles, until finally you get to the end of the decade, and then you're going to have some slightly different things to do. The one thing I need to add as well is, when you get to the next cycle, the starting player is simply the player to the left of the current starting player. There's no real difficult decision to make, and the reason why I bring that up is because the starting player is determined in a very different way, in a very important way here at the end of the round. So at the end of the round, what you're going to do is you're actually going to pull back all of your action markers here. So suppose Red had something like this for whatever, something like that, because he would have taken 4 actions throughout the course of this particular decade, and then all the other players would have as well. So you're going to take these back. This is your opportunity to take them back, and then what you're going to do is, we have a little reminder here on top of the event as to, you got to pay now your workers in your warehouse and your workers on, or your shipmates on your ships. And again, the price that you pay them is going to be determined by this value here on the side of the chart, unless of course you have the Harbor Master. Now, like the foreman that I showed you out before, the Harbor Master tells you that it basically gives you the same benefit, that instead of paying these guys full price, you can minus £2 from their wages up to 4 guys. So he's pretty useful for if you're pushing a big warehouse or shipping strategy. He can really reduce the cost that you're going to have to pay. Now remember, at any one of these moments when you have to pay somebody and you cannot, you have to do the emergency sale of shares, or perhaps take out a loan, as I've already talked about before. At any opportunity when you don't have the cash, you've got to come up with it through these other means, which again are not really desirable for your ability to be able to advance and perhaps win the game. And I mention that because only after you pay these guys can you fire as many of them as you want. This is how you can also get rid of them, but you cannot get rid of them before you pay for them. So the order matters. So say we do that, then we flip it over and we actually have a little event. So all of these events are randomly determined. The only thing that really matters again is there's going to be a bureaucracy event randomly flipped in the first 3 events of the game, and we have an end of game event, which is basically a stock action that you can do, so everybody can take any remaining money and convert it into shares, because again, money by itself doesn't doesn't do anything. It's the value of your shares multiplied by your number of shares that you really care about. So in this particular case, each player gets one additional little white square action, which, as you'll recall, is your ability to take these different tiles or perhaps move a tile that's associated with a particular factory to another factory. And then we have determining starting player. This is quite a neat element of the game, and I'm mentioning it because it's an element of the game that was totally beyond me and that we totally missed about the first 3 times we played the game. You are going to calculate the net worth of your company, and every player is going to do that. And again, that's the number of shares you currently have multiplied by the value. And if you need to, again, look at the player's book, and you've got this handy dandy chart so you can actually do this calculation quite easily. Now, the player who has the lowest value gets to determine the starting player. And this is huge because, again, as you start to imagine, when you walk your way through this, not every player is going to be actively involved with all of the different factories, and they may be involved at different degrees throughout the course of the game. So sometimes it might not matter to you if you're starting player, say for the cloth and linen, you'd rather be starting player for the lamp, whatever your strategy is based on. You might want the hammer on this, so that way you can see what people, how they've adjusted their appeal. You can see what everyone else has done with their actions so that you can respond accordingly to hopefully get the market share that you want domestically, or have enough goods left over so that you can ship them, whatever it might be. So then if you're in the last position, essentially what you can do now is decide when you want the hammer, when you want to go last or when you want to go first. You get that decision, and that's an extremely important decision and something not to be taken lightly, because once you determine the starting player, then you'll go back and you go back to the next round here, for example, the next decade, and then once that starting player is starting player for this cycle, then the person to his left will be the starting player for this cycle, and so forth. So you have to calculate when it is you want to be starting player and then make the starting player for the bread accordingly. So I hope that makes sense. But as you might imagine, there is another development tile here again, charisma. We already talked about this bonus point even when tied, which is pretty sweet, but you can also determine start player, and you can do this just at a normal time or during this time as you want. And this is a one and done type thing. You can tell by the red star right there. So this is also a really great tile to have, especially when you're not sure going into the final round, for example, and you want to make sure you have the upper hand for a particular factory. So that is everything, all the different components and bits and pieces of this game. I hope that it makes sense to you. I'm just going to jump all the way down here to the very bottom, where again you'd have your the last event. You're going to have to pay your warehouse workers and your stevedores, I guess they're called, or your harbor workers, and you're going to have this end of game stock exchange action. So simply what you can do there is, if you have extra amounts of cash, you can then rebuy. Say we're way up here for red, you can buy back as many possible shares as you can for, say, 24 pounds in this particular example, and then you would do that last stock exchange, and then you would also have the opportunity to pay back any loans that you may have. So the reason why I point this out is a lot of people get a little bit stressed, especially in this last round, because they forget that they're going to have this actual opportunity presented to them by the game to buy back some shares and to get themselves in a position for the actual end of game calculation. So that's going to be the very last thing that's going to occur. So don't stress out too much about it. But what's going to happen here is, now you've bought back as many shares as you possibly can. You're going to have some residual money maybe left over, and then there's going to be some adjustments now to your share value indicator, which I've already talked about, which I'm going to remind you of, that might drop your actual share value down. And what's interesting about this is it really matters sometimes where your share value indicator is, because sometimes those adjustments don't really affect you that much. But let me tell you what those adjustments are again. So you will recall, if you took one of these worker actions and you populated a whole bunch of workers on a factory that had already produced for the final time in the last round of the game, and you did not go back to actually produce out of that factory using one of these special action markers here, where you can actually produce a factory out of turn. If you did not go back and actually produce it, this share value indicator goes down 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and you lose 2 complete shares from your player area. So again, don't do that. That is a certain way not to win. The second thing you're going to check is your contracts again. Any contracts here that are left up here that have not yet been resolved, you haven't honored your contracts, you're a dishonorable businessman, your share value indicator will go down by the amount of that particular contract. So in this particular case, he would go down 8. So that is brutal. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then you recalculate the value of your company based on your new share value and the number of shares that you have, say for example, if you lost some during that recalculation. So you see that even though we bought back all the shares that we could at the end of the game for a very high price, those shares were actually a negative consequence to us because we were just managed other aspects of our business inappropriately. So then again, you'll just reference this chart here at the back of the book, and whoever has the biggest number wins. If there's a tie, you would use money as the tiebreaker. And that is Arkwright. I certainly hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it makes sense to you. I tried to cover as many things as I possibly could so that you could get a full appreciation for how this game and all the little things and how they work and how they interact with each other, and give you a feeling for the actual gameplay of this particular video. If you like this video, please come find me on Facebook, Connect More Board Games. If you ever have any questions, additional questions or comments, please leave them down below or drop me an email at david@connect-more.ca. I look forward to having the conversation with you, and more importantly, I want to know about your experiences with Arkwright. Please come find us, let us know how you're enjoying it, and I hope this video helps you get this game on the table and enjoyed by you and your game group. Till then, have a great time gaming. Cheers, I'm David Minkin.